The whole thing with COVID-19 was bizarre for most people in general, but especially people my age. You never know what's reality. You never had a time in your life that you weren't just being fed so many contradicting concepts all at once.
Welcome to the Unitarian Christian Alliance podcast, episode 80, Deconstructing to Agnostic, with guest Josiah Wright. This is part 1. I'm Mark Kane. Today, it's Josiah's journey into agnosticism. His story is particularly valuable because it's a first-hand perspective of a questioning and seeking young man born in the era of limitless information. He was my guest on episode 20, The Good, the Bad, and the Boys' Home, almost 2 years ago. It's not uncommon for me to lose touch with a guest over the following months. Life happens. But for Josiah, those months took an unexpected turn. Here was a young man starting a family surrounded by people of faith and love, having come through many struggles and having found some peace and purpose. That was a powerful story, but yet he walked away from his faith. He became agnostic, that is, one who believes that things cannot be known. In agnostic, it's A for not, and gnosis or gnosis, not knowing. It's uncertainty. And it's not the same as atheism, atheism. That's not theism or belief in no God. A Unitarian Christian is neither an atheist, pantheist, omnist, like the Unitarian Universalists, agnostic, polytheist, secular humanist, existentialist, nihilist, nor a Scientologist. And no, we aren't pagan, despite what some Christians say. We believe that a pure expression by a follower of Jesus would be the specific answer to Jesus' question, "Who do you say that I am?" We can answer precisely the same words that Peter answered. We can stop answering at the end of the sentence exactly where he stopped, and like Peter, be praised for our understanding by the Messiah himself. Ask yourself, if Jesus praised Peter's answer, why, on our lips, is it damnably untrinitarian and inadequate? This tradition of Christians condemning Christians is unbecoming. In our circles, there are many willing to ask hard questions, many who have given up doctrines which had been part of their identity and helped them be tied to a group. Painful, but admirable. And if that's you, hang on to the end for news of this year's 2024 UCA Conference. We have a new location and dates. So, is a willingness to lose your fellowship community because of what you read in Scripture, is that proper Berean behavior, or is that scandalous? What should we be asking of the people in the pews? Believe what you're told? Well, Josiah isn't entirely unique. It's not surprising that someone in our circle has to deal with doubts. When all of Christianity says you're wrong, it's not uncommon to be asking yourself difficult questions. For Josiah, his doubts got a solid foothold and pulled him from Christian to agnostic. How does that happen? Well, Josiah graciously unpacks it for us. He mentions A2K several times. That's Allegiance to the King, one of the Unitarian Christian groups located in Kentucky, but they have further reach than that through an online ministry for isolated people and the work they're doing in the Philippines with Edgardo Gavino. Episode 54, The Fire in Me. This is the community of people that he references in his story. Josiah is young, and his journey is certainly not done. But here, at this significant moment, it was an excellent place to pull into the rest stop and stretch and reflect.
So, Josiah, it's been 2.5 years since we last talked. And it almost seems like it was just yesterday.
Really?
But then I look back and I find the episodes like, that was so long ago.
Yeah, it seems at the same time it's been 5 years because of how much has happened, but space-wise, it just seems like it's been just yesterday, like you said.
Yeah. So your life has had some amazingly bizarre twists. Like, I didn't even know that this was going on with you.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to have you talk about it, because the people who met you 2.5 years ago would be fascinated to find out what unfolded following that. So
Yeah.
I think they should just probably listen to the first episode if they want to hear the whole story. There's no point. No point in going through that again.
Yes. Yeah. That was many years condensed into 45 minutes. I listened to that podcast probably 2 months ago, and I was like, man, that sounds like somebody else completely because of how much I've been through. But I think that's kind of a lot of people's response is what you said is most people didn't know. I became an agnostic at one point. I never posted anything on Facebook about it. I didn't really care to have a lot of drama about it.
So there was this gap of where's Josiah?
Yeah.
For everybody else who's also had a gap because they've only listened to you once 2.5 years ago. And now today,
yes,
we're filling in the gap.
Yeah.
Let's go back almost basically to when we had the interview. At that point in your life, you had moved, you were starting a family.
Yeah.
Things were trucking along okay, but something happened.
Yeah. When we had our interview, everything was really, really good. I was really on fire for God. I always have been, really, since I was a kid. If you listen to the last episode, it had a lot of bumps in the road, but always really, really wanted to follow God. That's just kind of how I grew up. But I had changed so many times on different theologies, gained lots more friends that were of different religions or coworkers who I was really close to that were atheist. I met so many people and changed so many times. It wasn't just once saved, always saved, and changing to first Oneness Pentecostal, then Unitarian. I was just always searching for truths, trying to find it. That it went on to Torah observance, and so I had met so many people that were really, really humble. My dad also just really studied and had friends that were really studying their own religion or very studied in being an atheist and just really knew what they were talking about, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people that were much older than I was and had spent a lot more time than I had studying things. And I was like, man, I really feel like I know all these things just because I've been told, or just with very, very little study compared to what I think it should take to actually know something.
Yeah. That's that place where once somebody knows what they don't know, you get past and you realize, oh man, the amount of information, like you could live in that little happy bubble of ignorance or of like, I learned 25 statements. I go to church every Sunday and we all sing the songs about the same things and it's all good. But you, as are many people in the UCA, you talk to people, you look, your exposure to people got very broad.
Yeah.
You had a lot of information that you were chewing on and thinking about.
Right. Yeah. I think in the history of the church or all religion, really, a lot of people will break away, but especially a lot of people my age seem to have just so much information bombarding them, whether it's politics or the whole thing with COVID-19 was bizarre for most people in general, but especially people my age. You never know what's reality. You never had a time in your life that you weren't just being fed so many contradicting concepts all at once. And so that I think a lot of people my age kind of struggle with knowing what to trust.
Yeah. And that's part of what I hope to accomplish with this. I want maybe an older generation to understand what it's like and how you perceive the world and how you absorb and think and process it.
Right.
So what happened then?
I had several times throughout that journey that I had heavy seasons of doubt. Heavy, not as in long, they were maybe a week or two. I read a Bart Ehrman book called How Jesus Became God. And I was like, wow, it's a little bit further than what I've been studying in Unitarianism. I thought it was a book on Unitarian views. And so that was like, oh man, there's a lot of stuff in there. And eventually realized he was pretty biased the more stuff I listened to about him because I looked up a lot more from him. But after the Torah observance and meeting even a whole nother world of different views, because there's a plethora of different views just in Christian Torah observance, really just admitted to myself that, hey, I don't know what I'm talking about. I basically just questioning, who am I to think I know what I'm talking about? And so just really started to take steps back, trying to find a base layer, and then just kept taking steps back to, how do I even know that Christianity is reality? How do I know that God is right? I studied people's spiritual experiences in other religions. The blue light experience that I had in the last episode, people had a similar experience. And so I was like, I can't really know based off study at this point because I'm way too young and naive in that. And I can't know off spiritual experiences, at least I thought. So I was just like, okay, I really just got to admit that I'm agnostic about most subjects, including politics and everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
Okay. So you said there was a moment when you're like, I don't know. Like that, the light bulb, I don't know, I was going to say the light bulb turned on or light bulb turned off.
Yeah.
You unscrewed the bulb and set it down and you're like,
yeah.
So at that point, had you already fed your mind with all the information that you needed to feel like you just didn't know anything? Or did you start, like, was that the beginning, the middle, or the end of your plummet?
That was kind of the beginning. I mean, it all kind of overlaps. That's when I started looking at, I tried to find people that were unbiased. And that is very hard. It seems like we all have bias. But yes, I found several YouTube channels, a couple books where it seemed like there were guys around my age group, or at least of the same headspace of not being just caught up in something, and still really couldn't relate with them. Either they left their religion, whether it was Christianity, Islam, or whatever. Most of their time was spent on tearing something down of, this doesn't make sense because of this reason.
Okay.
No matter what it was. And so that was kind of a breath of fresh air to see so many people that were just willing to leave their whole upbringing.
Okay. So you experienced the same community kind of that people who discover Unitarians exist.
Yes.
To know that you're not alone.
Yeah.
And in this case, though, you weren't alone in people deconstructing, to use the word, taking apart their faith.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time exploring different religions, different ways of thinking. I got into Greek philosophy a little bit. There's a lot there. So I say a little bit. I studied it for a few months, night and day. But I really just came to feeling safe to tell my wife after about 6 months. I started to question all that around January of 2021. And I took about 6 months to know that I was it's funny to say know that I'm agnostic, but just to feel safe in explaining myself, Brandolin, I don't know where you stand, but I don't know what I believe, and I'm willing to be okay with that while I kind of try to reconstruct whatever reality is out there. If it's out there, I want it, but I just want to be honest with you where I'm at. And she had actually really come to the same place. I think she really follows me a lot and has been on a wild ride with me. So I think maybe subconsciously she knew what was going on.
Well, it'd be hard to not know.
Yeah.
I mean, there has to be a substantial difference in your everyday life if you're in the state of, I don't know if any of this is real.
Right.
There had to have been an obvious, measurable shift in your life.
Yes. And we moved physically. It was mostly for my wife and my kids. I wanted them to be around my side of the family. That her side of the family we don't have a relationship with, but my side of the family she really enjoys, and they really enjoy her. Kind of has some stability for her. At that time in Kentucky, there wasn't a big group of people that she could rely on. And so she kind of felt alone. And then my kids also, I grew up around some grandparents till I was 7 that I really enjoyed. And then we moved away. And I was like, man, I really wish I had more time with my grandparents. So wanted to get my kids around their grandparents as well. So I had 6 months leading up to that, kind of wanted to get away physically from very strong Christian people because I knew it was coming, that I'd have to admit, okay, I can't keep coming to a fellowship. I can't keep leading a small group. Well, I don't even believe any of this stuff.
Okay. That reminds me of the things that the Jehovah's Witnesses have where you're physically in and mentally out. PMO, I think they call it, because they can't escape.
Oh, wow.
Well, if they do, it's going to totally disrupt everything. So they stay.
Yeah.
So in your case, you were, for a period of time, still active.
Right.
You would attend Bible studies together.
Right.
But you sensed it wasn't legitimate.
Exactly. And when we finally did move back to Kansas, got physically away from all the very strong Christian influence in my life.
And that was in the Paducah area.
Yeah, in the Paducah area. Because we came over to John Truett's house all the time. I worked with Nathan, his son, and so I was around a lot of Christians, and it'd be kind of weird to work at the same company with all of them. And, it just, the bigger reasons really were for my wife and my kids. But that was definitely a perk in my mind at the time. Probably a month after we got there, I broke it to my wife, and she wasn't disappointed at all. And she was more scared to tell me that she felt the same way. She had been that way for a little bit. I still was leading one of the small groups for A2K. And so I still felt like I had some moral sense of I don't want to be lying to these guys. I can give the people encouragement and keep them going on their Christian life, but that wouldn't be right. So broke it to all of those people, John Truitt, Edgardo Cavino, and Jackson. They definitely, all but Edgardo. Edgardo immediately was like, no, you don't have to do that. And I love him so much. I felt bad. We'll get to that later. John took a little bit of time to think about it, and I had gone through some doubts before, so he was like, did you ever read that Nancy Piercy book I gave you? And I was like, no. Broke it to Brandon Duke, and he was really my wingman through the whole thing, honestly. Throughout that process, I was like, don't tell anybody, but I don't know about this and that. And he sent me Natural Theology, the book from William Lane Craig, and I didn't read that book either. I didn't know what to believe and who was biased and who wasn't. But he really kind of has that brain that doesn't mind doubting. John continually tried to talk with me, Jackson a little bit, but most people just kind of let them know their thoughts about my stance and just let me be, which was probably the right thing to do.
I think I want to understand the process of doubting with a little more clarity. I mean, I suspect, for example, that you still believed that the Bible teaches a Unitarian view of God more than a Trinitarian view of God.
Gotcha.
Like that was probably like, well, yeah, it does.
Right.
Maybe just make that doubt more realistic for me.
Yeah.
Since I've not had that doubt.
Right.
I've been a Christian my whole life. I've had doubts, but I haven't had a doubt that took me to the point of I am going to have to tell people I'm not a Christian. That is so far outside of my experience that it would help me to see it, because maybe I could recognize that either in myself in a future day,
right,
or in somebody that I know.
Right. So it did start with just not knowing if what I had studied was correct. There's not a real good way to say that deeper, even though that feels shallow compared to what it felt like. Just what it felt like is there's such a huge mountain of knowledge that so many people have climbed, but there's hundreds of those huge mountains. I don't even know which one to start climbing. And there's no possible way I can climb every mountain of knowledge out there in my lifetime.
So it felt insurmountable.
Yes, felt insurmountable. And
you had this other thought in the back of your mind, like, well, people just believe what they were told because those were the people I bumped into, right? It was that kind of thing?
Yeah, it was that kind of thing. It was also, since I had spiritual experiences, I was thinking, well, maybe those were real, but not really connected to Christianity. But since I thought they were happening because of Christianity, that I just kind of used that to validate my faith, when in reality, there's some other reality out there, and Christianity just thinks they have a grasp of it, and Muslims think they have a grasp of it, and different, New Agers have a grasp of it, or maybe there's something out there that nobody's ever found. I knew that you can't have multiple truths at once. So either that was true, and I would have to admit to that, or none of it was true, or maybe one needle in a haystack is true somewhere in the world, and hopefully someday I'd come upon it. But I does that answer your question?
I think so. And so the younger person, when they have this kind of doubt, if I was your age and I was experiencing this, I don't even know. I'm trying to imagine how that would have played out. You have the internet, you have every possible view at your fingertips.
Right.
So what might feel somewhat overwhelming if I'd picked up a book at the library on Muslims and another book on Buddhism, I might have, slowly read through 4 books in the course of a week.
Right.
You could watch 100 YouTube videos in the course of a day.
Yeah. And I did. I did. That's one thing throughout this whole journey. So with Once Saved, Always Saved, I still believe to this day, now that I've come back to the faith, that God led me through that. But once I did find out other people did believe it, I binged YouTube to make sure, just in case I'd been misled. I've just found all the views possible about that could be easily accessed, and just made sure, okay, yeah, this makes the most sense. And I did that with Trinitarianism and Unitarianism. And then when it came to being an agnostic, I just was agnostic about most subjects in my life, is where I boiled down to.
Okay, so your natural tendency was to take a topic, binge it,
right,
and then come to a conclusion.
Yeah, in this age, it's so easy to do that. But I finally realized that I hadn't done that with Christianity in general.
You were comfortable checking the once saved, always saved doctrine and looking at that aspect of Christianity. But Christianity itself,
it didn't even occur to me that I should check that.
And then you did.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you've given up your Christian faith and now you are straight agnostic. What is life like? And I'm asking this from a personal level, having never had that mindset in my head ever. Because I think you would describe it in a way that's more relevant to my mind than just go to the internet and say, what's it like being an agnostic?
Right. Yeah. And I did do that in different ways, asking, the internet, what's it like to be this or that? And no, they don't give very good explanations. It's kind of hard to when you're not sitting in front of somebody. Mm-hmm. But the process of letting everybody know really hurt. It was a very painful experience. I don't like to let people down. I've always been that way. And so I let a lot of people down. Previously, several people had told me that if I rejected Jesus' deity, that I would become an atheist. So, most of those people, except for my dad, because I wanted my dad to know, he was one of those people that told me that. I didn't even let them know. I didn't want to prove them right. Yeah. But
that nugget needs to be unpacked.
Yes.
People see folks leaving behind their traditional beliefs in a church and see this as a path to perdition or whatever.
Right.
But in your case, you continue down the path.
Yeah.
And you did end up there. So
exactly.
You were in that spot.
Yes. I knew that my family, my sister especially, would be hurt that my kids wouldn't be brought up in the faith, because most of them are still once saved, always saved. They probably think either he's just going through a phase, or maybe never was saved, but there's still hope for him or something like that. But I knew they were fearful for my kids never hearing the truth or being influenced in the opposite direction. So that was hard. But after I got through that process, I was at a neutral place where I could talk to anybody, no matter what their faith or religion. A lot of people don't have a religion, and they all were okay with me. Before, a lot of people who were atheists, we could only go so far in a relationship where we would hit some bumps in the road where I have my faith. And it doesn't matter if I say, well, those Christians that treated you badly, they were not acting like Jesus. It doesn't matter to them for the most part. They're still holding on to their hurt. There's somebody that is a Trinitarian. Normally, as a Unitarian, I could definitely not go that far with them. But now I'm a lost soul that needs saving. I'm fine to talk with them. So it was really good as far as relationships went. When my dad and my brother had several long sessions with me, they finally grasped that I wasn't just rejecting God because I wanted to live a sinful life. I was rejecting him because I didn't know if he existed.
Oh, yeah. That's a common framework. Like, well, the reason you reject God is because, well, I want to do drugs and run off with a secretary.
Right.
It's painful to do that as a Christian, but if I wasn't a Christian, certainly that happens a lot.
Yeah.
But you're saying not for you.
Right. I think it's there because it has happened in the past. But I think just this era of so much information, I think it is just really doubting what you've been told.
Mm. So how long then, once you kind of came to the stability zone, the stable agnostic stage of your life, how long were you there?
Exactly a year, June to June.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And so during that time, you lived away from A2K people.
Yeah.
You made new friends. And then if you were at a stable, it sounds like you weren't personally pained on a regular basis for having a lack of a faith. Like it didn't gnaw at your soul. You had kind of just let it go. Is that right?
I let it go. It bothered me. My goal was to hit base, find wherever my neutral base was, and then build up from there. And we actually, in the deconstruction little mini seminar we had at the UCA conference, he talked about most people don't bounce back up. They don't reconstruct after they deconstruct. And that's exactly what happened. Is it seemed so insurmountable and just impossible that I could know truth that I just never did start climbing.
So you were the non-bouncing ball.
Yes.
More of a splat, not a boing.
Yes, very much splat.
Okay. So during that time, you still had some connections with folks. It sounds like Brandon Duke was somebody that you would periodically communicate with.
Yeah. And Brandon and John and Jackson, honestly. Mostly John. I've just talked to him generally about life stuff.
Would he reach out to you or were you trying to avoid him?
No, I wasn't. He would reach out once in a while. It was about equal, 50-50. Okay. With Brandon, it was hard to get some time. But when we did have time, we would talk for a couple hours usually. And so that was good.
Those experiences then, even though you were stably at your splat base, you just splatted there and you weren't changing.
Yeah.
how impactful were they? What were they achieving for you, or were they?
They were just friendships to me at the time. We did have some conversations of, trying to figure things out on the spiritual side, but for the most part, John just let me be. Lord had told him to do that. I obviously wouldn't have believed him at the time. John has helped me a lot with my marriage and marriage counseling, so there was some of that going on as well. So it was beneficial as far as a friendship, but as far as reconstructing any kind of faith, it wouldn't go anywhere. Okay. I mean, later on, we'll get into a story with Jackson. Much time was spent on his part, and it just went nowhere.
Okay. So it's interesting because if I had a friend and they went through this process, I would be doing this thing in my head, like, well, what should I be? How should I be to that friend? And I might be afraid that they would just cut me off entirely. But in your case, you maintain the friendships.
Yeah.
You had something more substantial in these relationships than merely we belong to the same religious organization.
Yeah.
These were real friendships.
Yes.
You would talk to Brandon, you would talk to John because you valued their opinion on something, because you wanted to have that connection.
Yes.
That just speaks to, why did Jesus spend 3 years with the disciples day and day? It's because then you have the connection that is much harder to break. If you just see somebody once an hour every Sunday, and then one day you leave.
You're going to get me going.
Oh
my gosh. Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. Yes. It's very important to have real relationships.
All right. Maybe we'll get you going another time. We don't have enough time.
Yes.
All right. So a year has passed. You've maintained a pretty stable, I can't climb the mountains, but something still happened.
Right. Yeah, obviously. Last August, I started a motorcycle repair business. I really enjoyed it, and it started to get big enough, even in the winter, which is like the dead season for motorcycles. It started to get too busy for my normal job, and so I quit that job. I knew I wouldn't make enough money, so I also started, I became a life insurance agent. So half the day I would try to sell life insurance, did pretty okay at it, and I did pretty okay at fixing bikes. But personally, I need to focus on one thing. Otherwise, I'm horrible at everything. I think that's most people, but me especially. It really, so, most business owners, their first business fails, but it started to fail. And I really, really wanted this shop. I wanted it to be something very special. It most likely will still happen. But with that, and then Brandolyn was going through some hard things on her own. And so there was tension between us. I didn't want to let go of the shop, but it was looking like I was just going to have to do sales of some kind. So I started going through a very expensive sales course. And my wife was going through a very expensive bookkeeping course. And so basically the funds started to get down to zero. And there was definitely money coming. I landed a really good job, but they wouldn't be able to hire me on for another month. And we were just completely out of rent money and everything. It was an awful mess. And so it never crossed my mind that, this is because I left God. It wasn't like that, because I knew enough people that had failed at business before and they lost everything. Fair. And that's what some people thought was happening. And maybe God was using it. If he wasn't causing it, he definitely used it. So basically what happened was I just called John. I just wanted to catch up with him. Also wanted some marital advice. Kind of at the end of that conversation, he's like, how are you doing? In general, I was like, oh man, I got to tell you, failing at this, failing at that. We have no money, renting from my parents, and they're good people, but they like to keep family and business very, very separate. And so there's a lot of tension right there. And I'm like, man, I don't know, just, pray for me. Because I was like, maybe it'll work.
That's true.
So,
as a good agnostic,
yes,
you would be okay with somebody praying for you.
Yes, exactly. I'll get to that later too.
Okay. All right.
So he basically gave me some advice and got off the phone. And at this time, he and Jackson and another person had started a forged family where they all get together and live as one unit. So they share finances, they share food, they constantly are in fellowship. They're just living as a communal family. I had known about that before and thought it was really cool and kind of researched a little bit about it. And but I knew I couldn't join while being an agnostic. That'd be kind of rocky for everybody.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he immediately got off the phone and went to Jackson and was like, hey, we need to give Josiah some money. He's going through some hard times. Jackson said, well, I've wanted him as kind of a right-hand man in my consulting company for a while, but it was never the right time. Let's just offer him a job. And so they were like, oh, okay. So like 5 minutes later, I get a call from Jackson. I was like, oh, I haven't talked to him in about 6 months. And so he's like, hey, you want a job? I was like, well, yeah. I knew what he did. He has an Amazon consulting agency. I was like, yeah, I could do that work. And so we talked for a while about what it would be like. And he was basically like, you can do this remotely. You can work as a contractor. I don't want to go into too much detail, but he got us out of a lot of holes. And basically what it was is you can work remote, but I need you to come up here and train for about a month and a half. So I was like, okay, that'll be hard for Brandolin, but we don't really have an option right now. So I didn't intend to move at all. I had really good friends with all the people I met with my business, and I got along great with my family. I actually got along better with them as an agnostic than a Unitarian. So I knew that Jackson at least wanted me to become a Christian and thought that there were enough things that were lining up in my life that, God was working in my life. And just really all the billboards about where are you going when you die, or, you have to choose yourself for God or the devil. It just, all that kind of stuff was real cringy. But even most things Christians said, give examples of what was going on in their life and why that was God moving. And it's just like, man, that could definitely be this other thing. And you're not even questioning that. So I knew that Jackson at least would try to convert me, but he was a really nice guy. I knew John, I could have really good intellectual conversations with John. And actually, I was looking forward to some of the questions I had to hear his thoughts. And so I didn't think it would be awkward. It was awkward before because I had contradicting beliefs and I didn't know how everyone would react, but I'd been talking to everybody. They knew where I sat.
Okay.
I started the training and had lots and lots of talks with Jackson. There's a big circle you can walk around. It's about a 15-minute lap, and we take 12, 14 laps just walking for miles, talking about stuff. And we both enjoyed walking. We go to the gym together, and just no amount of apologetics or reasoning changed my mind. And we had many of those walks because every time something supernatural or a little bit coincidental would happen, he'd be like, okay, we're going to take a walk. We're going to talk about this. And I'm like, no, that maybe it's what you're saying, but it very easily could just be coincidence in this way or that way, or maybe that guy planned on saying that. So I could write a whole book on what happened in just 2.5 weeks. But that's what it took, is 2.5 weeks of going to a little community church that God called the Forged family to minister to help train up. And the guy there that was the head pastor, now he's co-pastor with John Truitt, I'd heard that he did some prophetic things where he told some stuff he shouldn't have known and really helped somebody in decision making. I was like, that could be coincidence. Maybe it's the thing where he's having spiritual power, but it's not really Christianity.
Right. An experience, like the blue light thing. Like, well, anybody can have an experience.
Right.
That's very easily dismissed, and that's what you were doing.
And not so much dismissing them. I would dismiss them as fact.
Okay.
It could fit over here. It could fit over here. So I guess I'll just put it in the I don't know, maybe someday pile.
That pile was pretty big
for you. It was very, very big. So one thing I'll say about the time that I had as an agnostic, I would pray regularly. Just whatever's out there. If there's anybody out there, I really would like to know, especially for my kids, is there any kind of reality I can believe in?
Okay, now you were both satisfied with staying at the bottom and not really climbing these mountains.
Yeah.
Yet it sounds like at your deepest level, you would have rather not been there.
Yeah.
But you weren't ready to just climb every mountain on the planet to figure out, what it is. Like maybe you would have preferred that it just dropped in your lap and you'd be like, a nice millennial. Can I just get it right now?
Yeah, I think there was some of that. I think there was some laziness in there. But it really did seem impossible to know. It's
not that you didn't want to climb out of the hole.
Yeah.
It seemed impossible. It'd be like, I might want to be a concert pianist right now, but I'm not even going to start because there's no way. I don't have the time.
It was also, what if I go down the rabbit trail and I find something that's most likely right, and I study that for a long time, and then I figure out I just wasted 40 years of my life. That was actually not true.
Oh.
So there was that aspect as well.
Yeah, you had a lot going on in your head.
Yeah, I did. Too much. So I had prayed regularly that something would happen. And I was like, I've heard a lot of things about this pastor. I was like, maybe something will happen here, but I'd want no confirmation bias whatsoever. And for anybody that doesn't know, it's like when you buy a new car, suddenly you see that car everywhere. It was always there, but you didn't really notice it until you had something that reminded you. I wanted to stay far away from that. So all these experiences, I was very, very skeptical. The first experience was the pastor. I'll say the pastor because his name is also John. So there's John Truitt and John Fitzgerald.
Yeah, I like that. The pastor is good.
Yeah, John Fitzgerald. If you went to the last UCA conference, you met him. He was with our group, and very cool guy. He was. A lot of people thought he worked there because he was picking up everybody's plates.
Thank you very much.
So he knew that I had left the faith. Definitely knew I left Kentucky. I knew him just a little bit before then. So he came back to me and said, "The Lord told me to tell you that he sent you away from your land to cause healing in that land and to cause reconciliation." That's kind of weird. And the first thing I thought about, it's kind of weird. The first thing that came to my head was that my wife would get healing being her faith back. And I was like, that's really weird. I don't know. I'm just going to keep that in the back of my head. And I called my wife later that day and she was like, "Hey, yeah, I actually went to your sister's church while you're gone." And I kind of figured she would. She really likes being around my sister.
Oh, because she was still back in Kansas.
She was still back in Kansas. Yes.
Okay. All right.
I went by myself to go train for a month and a half. I left my wife at home.
Okay. You just hear from the pastor.
Right.
It's in the back of your mind.
Right.
And then you talk to Randall.
And she said, "I went to your sister's church, and it's kind of like a group that goes from house to house. Don't have a lot of structure to their services, but they're a really cool, amazing group of people." And she said, "Your sister's friend came and asked me about myself and how's my relationship with God." And I told her, "Well, I don't have a relationship with God." And she asked me why. And my wife just goes on to explain that she told this lady, all the reasons why she doesn't have faith, because she got more reasons than I had to not have faith. She was definitely further away from searching for truth than I was. And she was just kind of waiting. If I found something, she would listen to it and maybe accept it. But so she told this lady everything, and the lady told her, "Well, you're really complicating it. It's actually supposed to be quite simple. And here's some verses about that." And she was like, yeah, cool, thank you. It was much nicer to the lady, but to me, she was like, yeah, it was just something you would generally hear from somebody trying to be apologetic about something. But the crazy thing was, I went to your mom's church a few days later, and they had a guest pastor that came in, and he said the exact same thing. He was talking all about not overcomplicating your faith, and he used the exact same verses this lady did. I don't know what to think about that. I was like, well, it could just be a coincidence. Maybe they're just reading the same newsletter or something, heard it on the radio. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I was like, that's a little bit interesting. And so that happened. There were so many. I'll try to shorten it down.
All right. Well, Josiah, why don't we come back to that next time? And that'll give us plenty of time to talk about it.
Sounds good.
Again, if you missed episode 20, don't forget to go back and hear where Josiah was 2 years ago. And now it's time for events, which you can read about at UnitarianChristianAlliance.org/events. In March, it's the James White and Dale Tuggy debate in Houston, Texas. In June, just recently added, it's a young adult getaway in Tennessee. This was the one that was mentioned in episode 75, the Young Adults Roundtable. In July, it's the first UCA conference in Europe. It's the UCA UK International Conference in Windsor, England, near London. Hear all about it in the previous episode, a roundtable with Daisy Jones and David Fenton. They are two of the committee making it happen. And a new announcement. What? No, this needs 3-part harmony. We have a location and dates for the 4th annual 2024 UCA Conference. If you were at last year's conference, there was talk about finding a location in the Western USA. There certainly are people out west who want to participate. Well, with the work for the first international conference in the UK, there was only so much time. If you want to help us work on an event out west for the future, reach out. Email conference@UnitarianChristianAlliance.org. So for 2024, we are keeping it in the eastern half of the United States, but further south this time. It will be at the Vines Center, just to the west of Little Rock, Arkansas. Dates are Thursday, October 17th, through Sunday morning, October 20th. The activities end on Saturday night. Sunday is a time for breakfast and goodbyes. It's been an earnest desire of the board from the start that we would find a spot where lodging, dining, and gathering all happens in the same place. None of that dispersing to various hotels when the activities end. Now you can sit and visit into the evening and just walk to your room and collapse. and dream of what is to come. All the meals will be included, and we're working on shuttle plans from the airport so you could fly in and not have to rent a car. With it all self-contained, we are expecting the total cost of the event to be comparable, if not better, than the piecemeal costs required when you have one place to meet and eat, have to then pay for a hotel, and then maybe a car to rent. But for that similar price, you get to enjoy a beautiful facility, auditorium, nature, and the autumn colors, I hear, are gorgeous in Arkansas in October. And you'll be in one place, so less logistics and cars and, at least for me, less stress. I'm excited about the environment and the ways that we will be able to connect in a single conference facility. And if you're in the South and thought Ohio was too far, this is your chance. Again, the conference events are October 17th through 19th, Saturday evening, with lodging through Sunday morning, including breakfast. Some folks may have to leave Saturday evening, but you have the option of one last rest and a good solid day to get home. There's a link to the Vines Center website in the show notes, and members of the UCA may already have received an email with information. Check it out and save the date. Watch for details on paper submissions, workshop submissions, which is new this year, and registration information. Write me, please. I'm not kidding. I love reading portions of your notes here at the end of the podcast, and others love it too. Or send me an audio file. Write podcast@UnitarianChristianAlliance.org. If you haven't seen the UCA shorts yet, those are videos on YouTube that are less than a minute. Check them out. Dale Tuggy has a slew of them, and we just added some from Keegan Chandler. Who knows? You may see me soon, too. Search for Unitarian Christian Alliance within YouTube and find and subscribe to our channel. Lots of things there, including this podcast. The UCA is just one teaspoon in the large mix. There are many out there, like you, making efforts to help people understand Scripture better, to support and encourage, maybe to serve the needy in your community. Keep it up. Look for ways to help and take those opportunities. Give and love. Whatever you've done to the least of them, you've done to the one who is our model of servanthood, the Messiah himself, who through obedience to his Father achieved what no one else had been able to do. He was exalted as a result. This is the pattern. He is the model. His reward will someday be ours. If this discussion has helped you understand deconstruction or agnosticism better, maybe you know someone else who could benefit. Share it. Let them know. In part 2, Josiah will explain how he was pulled back out of the pit of I don't know, and into a faith community. Thanks for listening, for sharing, and for being on this journey with me and us. Let's meet soon. May God bless you in your truth pursuits. I hope this podcast serves you well.